Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today we have ourselves a track from an act named Kesselhaut titled Never Lets Up. And if we switch over to here we have ourselves a track on Spotify and we're going to listen through it from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go!
Never lets up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up.
It's gorgeous with these vocal harmonies and how they gradually layer over top, nice and shimmery.
Never let it out, never let it in, never let it in. Never let it out, never let it out. Never let it in, never let it in. Well, the empty shells made it hard for Sammy to sort out the things he could sell for candy. And Isabel fell down a flight of stairs, thinking no one cares. The party that night never offered candy, and never any sweets from the bowl of Sammy. He could tell the world of Isabel and no more stars in the sky. And we caught up to each other after nearly losing it all. Barely knew each other. You just can't leave us all behind. Let's up it.
I think it's gorgeous. I think it's gorgeous. I love the old school kind of tone of it. There is a way it's produced and recorded that kind of reminds me of the 60s and 70s with the kind of folkish, kind of rockish, kind of the acoustic stuff from that era. You know, it's got a warmth and a glow to it. The organic nature of the performance with the guitars, the bass, and the drums being very kind of subtle in the mix as well, give me that inflection. But it's also very kind of comforting and charming as you listen to these people having to deal with the fact that stuff just never lets up.
Never let up, never lets up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up. Out, never let it out. Never let it in, never let it in. Never let it out, never let it out. Never let it in, never let it in. With a pretty bell in Miami, in the hotel paid by Sammy. There's quite enough time for telling the rough time that Isabel's having. And she looked up to Poppy Sammy, pretending that the sweets made her happy. But Sammy can't pretend as well as Isabel as he fell from the sky. But we caught up to
And strings.
each other after nearly losing it all. Barely knew each other. You just can't leave us all behind. Up to each other after nearly losing it all. Barely knew each other. You just can't leave us all behind. Let's up, it'll never.
Interesting sort of like a movement into that higher range there. That falsetto was nice. It was kind of showing a bit of vulnerability as we told the story there. I'm not quite sure what to make of the story with Isabel and Andy and stuff like that. Like, I have been listening to it. I'm trying to tie it into the hook line and sort of acclimatize to it. But I like the way the vocals are sung.
Let's up, it'll never let up. Never lets up, it'll never let up. Out, never let it out. Never let it in, never let it in. Never let it out, never let it out. Never let it in, never let it in. And we caught up to each other after nearly losing it all. Barely
It's a charming track. It's a nice song to listen to on a rainy day. I think it's got a lot of positives about it. I will talk about that more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from an act named Kesselhaut, titled Kesselhaut. I think it's Kesselhaut. Apologies if I mispronounced that. The song titled Never Lets Up. What do I think this track is about? I think it's about someone or people like Isabel and stuff like that, and Andy, or I could have been Andy, to be fair. People dealing with their issues of their everyday life, looking up to the sky, occasionally falling down from it, maybe sort of aiming for their dreams and then like coming back below. And I think at the end we kind of refamiliarize with one another. We learn to maybe not take each other for granted. We commiserate with each other after potentially losing it all. I think, when we never let it out, never let it in, is that sort of is also inferring that we don't talk about what bothers us or what ails us, and that we also don't let anybody else in, and that's the reason why we end up so isolated. I'm not sure. There are some interesting things being discussed here, and I have like pieces of them, and I suppose as I think about this track later in the day, I'll kind of have my sort of final thoughts on it. But no, for now, I think that's my kind of interpretation of what's going on. I think it's about people sort of trying to cope with life whenever it throws at them, and then trying to communicate or connect with one another in order to help themselves get through it, or to not get through it. The singing is quite poetic. I really appreciate the way we phrased the lyrics, the male vocals and the verse parts, and the sit-ins and the centers and the chorus parts were fragrant. I enjoyed the kind of sing-song kind of folkish kind of inferences there, the stylics. I think that we were doing it in a way that was reminiscent of a lot of maybe like the early Beatles or like kind of other folk artists. And I'm not saying the Beatles were folk, but like a lot of that kind of acoustic singer-songwriters from like the 60s and 70s there, where we had like this kind of old cool kind of vinyl, I don't know how to describe it, like an LP-ish kind of glow or haze to it that it made it sort of sound a bit more sort of vintage. It gave it a nostalgic feel for a time when I wasn't alive, and that's a really surreal feeling, but like at the same time, I appreciate the attention to detail with making really interesting melodies, as well as the harmonies where we had the lady backing vocalists over top and assigned with the Never Lets Up parts and the hook lines, and it was fantastic having the vocals stacked in the upper register helped the chorus part sound a bit bigger, even though the song was pretty consistent dynamically in regards to perceived loudness the entire time. Like it was smooth. There were no weird notes or awkward parts there. It was nice and tuneful. We were comfortable with our vocal technique in general. It seemed like we were really sort of in the mood and fully committing 100% to the performance, and I don't think there was a note out of place. And I can understand how we're trying to sort of like tell the story of these people. I can kind of gather how the lyrics would match with the way we sung. The track at 3 minutes 58, or rather 4 minutes, that's a great length for this. We had several different verse sections. We had a few choruses. We had time as well in instrumental parts for the guitars, bass, drums, the strings later on to come in and sort of fluctuate and, apparate and separate in the mix. We had it various instrumental layers at different points in the perspectives there. We didn't have everything the whole time, which made the track more interesting structurally as well as in regards to how it was performed. There was a really satisfying loop with the chord progressions that we had there, with the way that the picked notes were done on the guitar and then the bass coming in after that, the chord note accents on the drums as well with the eighth notes. And we didn't really have any sort of like lead sections or crazy drum fills or anything like that. The bass line was very sort of supportive of things in the low end and followed along the root notes very well. The guitars arpeggiated with broken chordal parts there. We had some strumming, I think, as well in there to kind of round out the harmonies there. And when those string sections, like the violins or whatever, came on the left side there, they were nice and full and rich in the mid-range there, but never too much. It wasn't overwhelming. Although I'm not sure if the violin wasn't more present in my headphones than the vocals were at later stages at times. I think when you had the backing vocals in the mains and focus, like the vocals in their full force, the strings were nicely sort of like leveled with that. But I think the vocals might have been a little bit smaller when the strings were there without the extra help. But still, you could understand what was going on. It was a slow track. We didn't sort of try to rush between sections. We didn't put a whole lot of crazy sort of alternate lead or alternate, like there weren't any solo sections or anything like that, or massive moves to kind of pull out the listener's attention the entire time. We were invited to just kind of sit there and contemplate what the singer was discussing. And I appreciate that in a track where it is slower that there weren't any sort of like gimmicks, songwriting gimmicks to try and sort of keep us entertained. It was just a really pleasant experience listening through it. The performance itself was tight. I mean, like, it wasn't like completely like 100% quantized, but I don't think that was the point. We were trying to play our instruments together with a sense of chemistry there that kind of sounded like it was done live in a studio, and I appreciate that there. Things were still tight rhythmically, don't get me wrong. There was just like a kind of a pulse there that kind of pulled at you a little bit, and I kind of enjoy the fact that like when we moved into those dun 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 dun, it was a very simple bass line and sort of progression there, a transition, but it wasn't as like pad-like as some of the other parts where the chords flowed and carried over the part. Like the vocals with their legato feel okay with occasional staccatos helped smooth out the choruses in comparison to some of the other bits. Or maybe I'm tripping, maybe it was the other way around. I hesitate, but either way, I like the fact that things weren't constant the entire time. We did mess around with perceived intensity of the notes and stuff, and the theme in general, I think the theme was handled really well. We had a nice glow, not only with the tone of the instruments and the slowness and the comfort that they were played with, but we also, it was almost like we could kind of sit there with the player next to us, kind of imagining. It makes me imagine stuff that I didn't think I'd be imagining when I listened to this. It's kind of dope how it kind of invokes that. But the lack of superfluous extensions within the harmonies there, working within the major minor triads there, the focus of the vocals for the main lead works there and sticking within sort of traditional major and scale shapes, key and scale and modal shapes, was dope. I think that keeping the theme nice and simple with a pleasant overtone was what we needed for the story like this. I think there was a nice connection there. There weren't massive changes dynamically throughout the performance there. Things were nice, quite glued in the studio side there. So I think it was just that even if there was a little bits going down, we wanted that constant nature, and that's fine. With a track at the longer end of the 2 to 4 minute sweet spot, I don't necessarily mind that we weren't sort of overextending that. If it had gone longer, though, we might needed to have had like another solo section on top to kind of steer ourselves away from the vocals for a bit and to sort of freshen things up. But that's why I again appreciate the strings that we had later on, because they clearly understand the importance of gradual development and sort of like with the compositionally with the instrumental layers. But no, I think the performance in general was tight. I don't think there was a note out of place. And the studio recording, mixing, and mastering, I'm happy with it. I think the leveling in general was pretty good. I think there was one part where like the string sound on the side sounded a bit too present, kind of took away from the vocals in the middle, but I think that might have been a repeated line anyway, so maybe that was deliberate. The guitars, bass, and drums, the different layers there with the strings as well. And there might have been other instruments in there. Those are just the main ones that I picked up on the first listen. They were nice, so they surrounded you in the stereo field, and things were nicely niched in the frequency spectrum with no weird resonant frequencies or anything like that. The gluing of the tracks in general was tight. There was a bit of dynamic range, not a huge amount, but I think that was done deliberately, and I don't think that it would have been made the track better to have had more change in between the quiet and loud parts. It was nice and loud without pumping, so the bus compression limiting was handled. And I just, as a final comment, I think they deliberately tried to make this sound a little bit more like the recordings from the mid to late 20th century there. I don't think they were trying to sort of sterilize and make it sound like clinical, pristine, perfect, and like a 2024 like pop song or like hip hop trap song or something like that. I acknowledge that, but I think there's merit to having things recorded, produced in a certain way, sound a certain vibe, especially if he aims to sort of look at how songs were written in the period. Like if you kind of like can imagine songs from that period and see how this would relate to it, I think there is a connection there. So I appreciate the way it was done, and I admire it. I commend it. But that's my review of this track from an act named Kesselhaut titled Never Lets Up, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias and their Spotify page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need to help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.